This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Section 31 of The Obscure Night of the Soul by St. John of the Cross. How the Soul Journeys Securely when in Darkness. In darkness and security. The darkness of which the soul here speaks relates, as I have said, to the desires, and to the interior, sensitive, and spiritual powers, which are all to be deprived of their natural light in this night, so that, being purified herein, they may be supernaturally enlightened. The sensitive and spiritual desires are lulled to sleep and mortified, unable to relish anything either human or divine. The affections are thwarted and brought low, incapable of excitement and having nothing to rest upon. The imagination is fettered and unable to make any profitable reflections. The memory is gone, the intellect is obscured, and the will, too, is dry and afflicted, and all the faculties are empty. And moreover, a dense and heavy cloud overshadows the wearied soul, and alienates it, as it were, from God. This is the obscurity in which the soul says that it travels securely. The cause of this security is evident, for usually the soul never errs, except under the influence of its desires, or tastes, or reflections, or understanding, or affections, wherein it generally is overabundant, or defective, changeable, or inconsistent. Hence the inclination to what is not becoming it. It is therefore clear that the soul is secure against error therein, when all these operations and movements have ceased. The soul is then delivered, not only from itself, but also from its other enemies, the world and the devil, who, when the affections and operations of the soul have ceased, cannot assault it by any other way or by any other means. It follows from this that the greater the darkness and emptiness of its natural operations in which the soul travels, the greater is its security. For, as the prophet saith, "Perdition is thine own, O Israel, only in me is thy help." The perdition of the soul is exclusively its own work, the result of its own operations, of its unsubdued desires, interior and sensitive, and its good the work of God only. When the soul is hindered from giving way to these evils, the blessings of the divine union descend upon it forthwith, in its desires and faculties, which that union will render heavenly and divine. If, therefore, when this obscurity lasts, the soul will look within, it will see how slightly the desires and the faculties have been diverted toward vain and unprofitable matters, and that it is secure against vainglory, pride and presumption, empty rejoicing, and many other evils. It is quite clear, therefore, that the soul which is in this obscurity is not only not lost, but that it gains much, for it acquires virtue. But here a question arises to this effect: why is it, seeing that the things of God are profitable and beneficial to the soul, and a source of security, that the desires and faculties are so obscured by him in this night that they cannot enjoy him or occupy themselves with him as with other things, but are, in a certain sense, less able to do so? To this I reply, that it is then very necessary for the soul to be clear of its own operations and devoid of all pleasure even in spiritual things, because its faculties and desires are base and impure, and even if they have pleasure in, and are familiar with, divine and supernatural beings, it can be only in a low way. It is a philosophical axiom that all that is received according to the condition of the recipient. From this principle it follows that the natural faculties, being without the requisite purity, strength, and capacity for the reception and fruition of divine things in their way, which is divine, but only in their own, which is mean and vile, ought to be obscured with regard to the divine way, so as to secure their perfect purgation. They are to be weaned, purified, and annihilated first, in order that they may lose their own low mode of acting and receiving, and that they may be thus disposed and tempered for the reception and fruition of what is divine in a lofty and sublime way. But this they can never do if the old man do not die first. Every spiritual gift, if it cometh not down from the Father of lights into the human will and desire, however much a man may exercise his taste, desire, and faculties about God, and however much he may seem to succeed, is still not divinely nor perfectly enjoyed. As to this, I might here show, were this the proper place to do so, that there are many whose tastes and affections, and the operations of those faculties, are directed to God and to spiritual things, who perhaps imagine all this to be supernatural and spiritual, when in reality it is nothing more, perhaps, than mere natural and human acts and desires. As they regard ordinary matters, so also do they regard good things, with a certain natural facility which they have in directing their faculties and desires to anything, whatever it may be. If I can find an opportunity in the course of this discussion, I propose to enter upon this question, and describe some of the signs by which we may know when the motives and interior acts of the soul in the things of God are natural only, when they are spiritual only, and when they are natural and spiritual together. It is enough for us to know that the interior acts and movements of the soul, if they are to be divinely influenced by God, must be first of all lulled to sleep, obscured and subdued in their natural state, so far as their capacity and operations are concerned, until they lose all their strength. O spiritual soul, when thou seest thy desire obscured, thy will arid and constrained, and thy faculties incapable of any interior act, be not grieved at this, but look upon it rather as a great good, for God is delivering thee from thyself, taking the matter out of thy hands, for however strenuously thou mayest exert thyself, thou wilt not do anything so faultlessly, perfectly, and securely as now, because of the impurity and torpor of thy faculties, when God takes thee by the hand, guides thee safely in thy blindness, along a road into an end thou knowest not, and whither thou couldst never travel, guided by thine own eyes, and supported by thy own feet. The reason why the soul not only travels securely when in obscurity, but also makes greater progress, is this. In general, the soul makes greater progress in the spiritual life when it least thinks so, yea, when it rather imagines that it is losing everything. Having never before experienced the present novelty which dazzles it, and disturbs its former habits, it considers itself as losing rather than as gaining ground, when it sees itself lost in what it once knew, and in which it delighted, travelling by a road it knows not, and in which it has no pleasure. As a traveller into strange countries goes by ways strange and untried, relying on information derived from others, and not upon any knowledge of his own, it is clear that he will never visit a new country but by new ways which he knows not, and by abandoning those he knew, so the soul, when it advances in spiritual life, travels in obscurity, not knowing the way. God Himself being the guide of the soul in its blindness, it may well exult and say, in darkness and security, as soon as it has penetrated the mystery of its state. There is another reason also why the soul has travelled safely in this obscurity. It has suffered. For the way of suffering is safer, and also more profitable than that of rejoicing and of action. In suffering God gives strength, but in action and enjoyment the soul does nothing but show its own weakness and imperfections. And in suffering too the soul practices and acquires virtue, and becomes pure, wiser, and more cautious. There is another more particular reason why a soul travels securely when in obscurity. This reason is derived from the consideration of the light itself, or obscure wisdom. The obscure night of contemplation so absorbs the soul, and brings it so near unto God, as to defend it, and deliver it from all that is not God. For the soul is now, as it were, under medical treatment for the recovery of its health, which is God. God compels it to observe a particular diet, and to abstain from all noxious things, the very appetite for them being subdued. The soul is treated like a sick man respected by his household, who is carefully tended that the air shall not touch him, nor the light shine upon him, whom the noise of footsteps and the tumult of servants shall not disturb, and to whom the most delicate food is given most cautiously by measure, and that nutritious rather than savoury. Obscure contemplation, which brings the soul so near unto God, is the origin of all these measures, and they are all measures of security to guard the soul. For in truth, the nearer the soul is to God, the more obscure the darkness, and the more profound the obscurity, because of the soul's weakness. The nearer a man reaches to the sun, the greater the darkness and suffering its light occasions, because of the weakness and impureness of his vision. So great is the spiritual light of God, surpassing all understanding, that the nearer we approach it, the more does it blind us. This is the meaning of those words of the psalmist: He made darkness the covert, the pavilion round about him, dark clouds in the clouds of the air, which is obscure contemplation, and the divine wisdom in souls, of which they have experience as of a thing near to the pavilion where he dwells, when God brings them near to himself. Thus, what in God is light and supreme splendour is to man obscure darkness, as St. Paul saith, as the royal prophet explains in the same place: At the brightness that was before him the clouds passed, that is, over the human intellect, the light of which, saith the prophet, is darkened with the mist thereof. O wretched condition of this life, wherein the truth is so hardly known! That which is most clear and true is to us most obscure and doubtful, and we avoid it though it is most necessary for us. That which shines the most, and dazzles our eyes, that we embrace and follow through, though it is the most hurtful to us, and makes us stumble at every step. In what fear and danger then must man be living, seeing that the very light of his natural eyes, by which he directs his steps, is the very first to bewilder and deceive him when he would draw near unto God. If he wishes to be sure of the road he travels on, he must close his eyes and walk in the obscurity. If he is to journey in safety from his domestic foes, his own senses and faculties. Well hidden and protected, then, is the soul in the dark waters close to God. For as the dark waters are a pavilion for him, so they are also to the soul perfect safety and protection, though in darkness, where it is hidden and protected from itself, and from all the injuries which created things may inflict. It is of souls thus protected that the psalmist spoke when he said, Thou shalt hide them in the secret of thy face, from the disturbance of men. Thou shalt protect them in thy tabernacle from the contradiction of tongues. These words comprehend all kinds of protection, for to be hidden in the secret of the face of God, from the disturbance of men, is to be strengthened in the obscure contemplation against all the assaults of men. To be protected in this tabernacle from the contradiction of tongues, is to be engulfed in the dark water. That soul, therefore, whose desires and affections are weaned, and whose faculties are in darkness, is set free from all the imperfections which war against the spirit, whether they proceed from the flesh or from any other created thing. Such a soul may well say, in darkness and security. Another reason, not less conclusive, why the soul, though in darkness, proceeds securely, is derived from that courage which it acquires as soon as it enters within the dark, painful, and obscure water of God. Though it be dark, still it is water, and therefore cannot but refresh and invigorate the soul in all that is most necessary for it, though it does so painfully and in obscurity. For the soul immediately discerns in itself a certain courage and resolution to do nothing which it knows to be displeasing unto God, and to leave nothing undone which ministers to His service, because this obscure love is so intensely vigilant and careful of what it is to do, and what it is to leave undone for His sake, so as to please Him. It looks around and considers in 1,000 ways whether it has done anything to offend Him, and all this with much more solicitude and carefulness than it ever did before, as I said when speaking of this anxious love. Here all the desires, all the strength, and all the powers of the soul, recollected from all besides, direct all their efforts and all their energies to the service of God only. Thus the soul goes forth out of itself, away from all created things, to the sweet and delightsome union of the love of God in darkness and security. Section 32 of The Obscure Night of the Soul by St. John of the Cross. Obscure contemplation is secret. By the secret ladder, disguised. I have three things to explain in reference to the three words of this line. Two of them, secret and ladder, belong to the obscure night of contemplation, of which I am speaking, and the third, disguised, belongs to the way of the soul therein. As to the first, the soul calls the obscure contemplation, by which it goes forth to the union of love, a secret ladder, and that because of two characteristics of it. First, this obscure contemplation is called secret, because it is, as I have said before, the mystical theology which divines call secret wisdom, and which, according to St. Thomas, is infused into the soul most especially by love, in a secret hidden way, in which the natural operations of the intellect and the other faculties have no share. And because the faculties of the soul cannot compass it, it being the Holy Ghost who infuses it, as the bride saith in the canticle, in an unknown way, we call it secret. And, in truth, it is not the soul only that is ignorant here, but everyone else, even the devil, because the Master who now touches the soul dwells substantially within it. This is not the only reason why it is called secret, for it is secret also in its effects. It is not only secret beyond the powers of the soul to speak of it, during the darkness and sharpness of purgation, when the secret wisdom purifies the soul, but afterwards also, during the illumination, when the wisdom is most clearly communicated. It is so secret that it cannot be discerned or described. Moreover, the soul has no wish to speak of it, and besides, it can discover no way or similitude to describe it by, so as to make known so profound an intelligence, so delicate an infused spiritual impression. Yea, and if it could have a wish to speak of it, and find terms to describe it, it would always remain secret still. This interior wisdom, so simple, general, and spiritual, enters not into an intellect entangled and covered over by any forms or images subject to sense, as is sometimes the case, and therefore the imagination and the senses, as it has not entered in by them, nor is modified by them, cannot account for it, nor any form of conception of it, so as to speak in any degrees correctly about it, though the soul be distinctly conscious that it feels and tastes this sweet and strange wisdom. The soul is like a man who sees an object for the first time, the like of which he has never seen before. He handles it and feels it, yet he cannot say what it is, or tell its name, do what he can, though it may be at the same time an object cognizable by the senses. How much less can we describe that which does not enter in by the senses? Such is the nature of the divine language, that the more interior, infused, and spiritual it is, the more it transcends all human intelligence. The powers of the senses, interior and exterior, cease, and their harmonies become mute. The holy writings supply both proofs and illustrations of this principle. Jeremias shows the impossibility of revealing and expressing the words of God. For when God had spoken to him, he knew not what to say, except, "Ah, ah, ah, Lord God." Moses also is an instance of the interior impossibility, that is, of the interior imaginative sense, and of the exterior also at the same time. For when God spoke to him out of the bush, he was not only more incapable of speaking than before, but was so terrified that he durst not behold, that is, the imagination itself became weak and silent. The wisdom of contemplation is the language of God addressed to the soul, purely spiritual, and the senses are not spiritual, so they do not perceive it, and so it remains a secret from them. They cannot understand it, nor explain it. This explains why some persons, walking in this way, good and timid souls, who, when they would give an account of their interior state to their directors, know not how to do it, neither have they the power to do it, and so feel a great repugnance to explain themselves, especially when contemplation is the more simple, and with difficulty discernible by them. All they can say is that their soul is satisfied, calm or contented, that they have a feeling of God, that all goes well with them, as they think. But they cannot explain their state except by general expressions like these. But it is a different matter when they have a consciousness of particular things, such as visions, impressions, and the like. These in general are communicated under some species, and the senses participate in them. In that case they are able to describe them. But it is not in the nature of pure contemplation that it can be described, for it can scarcely be spoken of in words, and therefore we call it secret. This is not the only reason why it is called secret, and why it is so. There is another, namely, the mystical wisdom has the property of hiding the soul within itself. For beyond the usual degree of this hiding, the soul is sometimes so absorbed in this secret abyss that it beholds itself distinctly carried away from all created things to a wild and profound solitude where no human being can reach it, to an interminable desert, which is the more delicious, sweet, and lovely, the more it is profound, vast, and lonely, and the more secret is the soul, the more it is raised above all created things. The abyss of wisdom so exalts and elevates the soul, bringing it within the course of the science of love, that it makes it not only understand how mean are all created things in relation to the supreme wisdom and divine sense, but also how low, defective, and in a certain sense improper are all the words and phrases by which in this life we discuss divine things, and how utterly impossible by any natural means, however profoundly and learnedly we may speak, to understand and see them as they are, were it not for the light of mystical theology. And so the soul in the light thereof, discerning this truth, namely, that it cannot reach it, and still less explain it by the terms of ordinary speech, justly calls it secret. This property of being secret, and of surpassing all natural capacity, belongs to divine contemplation, not only because it is itself supernatural, but also because it is the guide of the soul to the perfections of union with God, which, not being humanly known, we must reach by being divinely ignorant. For, to use the language of mystical theology, these things are neither understood nor known when they are sought, but when they are found and practiced. This is the meaning of the following words of the prophet: "There is none that is able to know her ways, nor that can search out her paths." The royal prophet also, speaking of this way of the soul, says, "Thy lightnings enlightened the world, the earth shook and trembled. Thy way is in the sea, and thy paths in many waters, and thy footsteps shall not be known." All this in its spiritual meaning refers to the subject before us. The lightnings that enlightened the world is the illumination of the faculties of the soul in the divine contemplation. The trembling of the earth is the painful purgation of which it is the cause. To say that the way of God, by which the soul draws near unto Him, is in the sea, and His paths in many waters, and therefore cannot be known, is to say that this way to God is secret, and is hidden from the senses of the soul as the way of one who walks over the waters is from the senses of the body, and whose footsteps cannot be known. The footsteps of God in those souls which He is drawing to Himself, making them great in the union of His wisdom, have also this peculiarity, that they are not known. Thus we find these words in the book of Job, impressing upon us this truth: "Knowest thou the great paths of the clouds, and perfect knowledge?" By this are meant the paths and ways of God, in which He makes souls great and perfect in His wisdom. These are meant by the clouds. Contemplation, therefore, by which God guides the soul, is secret wisdom. Section 33 of The Obscure Night of the Soul by St. John of the Cross. How this secret wisdom is also a ladder. I now proceed to the second part, to show how this secret wisdom is also a ladder. There are many reasons for calling secret contemplation a ladder. In the first place, as men employ ladders to mount up to those strong places where treasures are laid up, so also by secret contemplation, without knowing how, the soul ascends and mounts upwards to the knowledge and possession of the treasures of heaven. This is well expressed by the royal prophet when he says, "Blessed is the man whose help is from thee. In his heart he hath disposed to ascend by steps, in the vale of tears, in the place which he hath set. For the lawgiver shall give a blessing. They that go from strength to strength, the God of gods shall be seen in Zion. He is the treasure of the citadel of Zion, that is, blessedness." We may call it a ladder also, because, as the steps of one and the same ladder serve to descend as well as to ascend by, so those communications which the soul receives in secret contemplation raise it up to God and make it humble also. For those communications which really come from God have this property, that they humble and exalt the soul at one and the same time. In the spiritual way, to descend is to ascend, and to ascend is to descend, because every one that exalteth himself shall be humbled, and he that humbleth himself shall be exalted. And as the virtue of humility is greatness, for the trial of the soul therein, God is wont also to make it ascend by this ladder, that it may descend, and descend that it may ascend. For thus are fulfilled the words of the wise man, "Before glorified, it is humbled." If the soul will reflect on the nature of the ladder, I omit what is spiritual and not felt, it will see at once the ups and downs of this road, how after prosperity come storms and trials, so that its previous repose seems to have been given it to prepare it and strengthen it for the present sufferings. How also after misery and distress come abundance and ease, so that the soul shall seem to have observed a vigil previous to the feast. This is the ordinary course of the state of contemplation, for until the soul attains to repose, it never continues in one state, for all is ascending and descending with it. The reason is that the state of perfection, which consists in the perfect love of God and contempt of self, can only subsist on two conditions: the knowledge of God and of oneself. The soul must of necessity be tried in the one and the other, in the first which exalts it, in the second which humbles it, until, perfect habits having been acquired, it ceases to ascend and descend, having arrived at the summit, united with God, who is at the top of it, and on whom, too, the ladder rests. The ladder of contemplation, which comes down from God, is shadowed forth by that ladder which Jacob saw in a dream, and the angels of God ascending and descending by it, from God to man, and from man to God, who was himself leaning upon it. This took place by night, when Jacob slept, as the Scriptures declare, that we may learn from it how secret is the way of God, and how different from all human conception. This is plain enough, for, in general, that which is our greatest profit, the loss and annihilation of self, we esteem a calamity, and that which is of but little value, comfort and sweetness, where, in general, we lose instead of gaining, we look upon as the more advantageous for us. But, to speak with more accuracy, and to the purpose, of the ladder of secret contemplation, I must observe that the chief reason why it is called a ladder is, that contemplation is the science of love, which is an infused loving knowledge of God, and which enlightens the soul, and at the same time kindles within it the fire of love, till it shall ascend upwards, step by step, unto God its Creator. For it is love only that unites the soul and God.
With a view to the greater clearness of this matter, I shall mark the steps of this divine ladder, explaining concisely the signs and effects of each, that the soul may be able to form some conjecture on which of them it stands. I shall distinguish between them by their effects with St. Bernard and St. Thomas, and because it is not possible to distinguish them in this life as they are in their own nature, because the ladder of love is so secret that it can be weighed and measured by God only. Section 34 of The Obscure Night of the Soul by St. John of the Cross. The mystic ladder has 10 degrees. Explanation of the first 5 of them. The steps of the ladder of love, by which the soul, ascending from one to another, rises upwards to God, are 10 in number. The first degree of love makes the soul languish to its great profit. Here was the bride when she said, I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem. This languishing is not unto death, but for the glory of God. For the soul faints away as to sin and all things whatsoever, that are not God for God's sake, as the psalmist testifies, My spirit hath fainted away, from all things after thy salvation, as it is more fully expressed in another place, My soul hath fainted after thy salvation. As a sick man loses all appetite and the taste of his food, and the colour vanishes from his face, so the soul in this degree of love loses all pleasure in earthly things, and all desire of them, and like one in love, its colour fades away. The soul does not fall into this languishing state, except through the vehement heat which descends into it from above, which is the mystic fever, according to the words of the psalmist. Thou didst send thy inheritance a free rein, O God, and it was weakened, but thou hast made it perfect. This languishing and fainting away of the soul, which is the first and earliest step to God, I have already explained, when I spoke of that annihilation to which the soul is brought when it begins to stand upon the ladder of contemplative purgation, when it finds no comfort, pleasure, nor support anywhere, in consequence of which it begins immediately to climb the other steps of the ladder. On the second step, the soul is unremitting in its search after God. Thus the bride sought him in her bed by night. She had fainted away there on the first step of the ladder, and found him not. She added, I will rise, I will seek him whom my soul loveth. This is now the unceasing occupation of the soul. Seek ye the Lord, seek his face evermore, is the counsel of the psalmist, and never rest till he be found, like the bride who, when she had questioned the watchmen, passed on in her search, and left them. Mary Magdalene did not remain even with the angels at the sepulchre. So anxious is the soul now, that it seeks the beloved in all things. All its thoughts, words, and works are referred to him. In eating, sleeping, and waking, all its anxieties are about him, as I have already described it when speaking of the anxieties of love. As love becomes strong regarding health, it commences the ascent to the third step by a new purgation in the night, as I shall hereafter explain, and which issues in the effects that follow. On the third step of the loving ladder, the soul worketh, and is fervent, and faints not. Of this step spoke the royal prophet when he said, Blessed is the man that feareth the Lord, he shall delight exceedingly in his commandments. If fear, the fruit of love, produces this delight, what will be the effect of love itself? On this step of the ladder the soul looks on great things as little, on many as few, and on length of time as a moment, by reason of the burning fire which consumes it. It is with the soul as it was with Jacob, who served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed but a few days because of the greatness of his love. If the love of a created being did so much in Jacob, what will the love of the Creator himself do, when it shall have taken possession of the soul on the third step of the ladder? Here the soul, because of the great love it has for God, is in great pain and suffering because of the scantiness of its service. If it could die for Him 1,000 times, it would be comforted. It looks upon itself as unprofitable in all it does, and on its whole life as worthless. Another most wonderful effect is that it looks upon itself as being in truth the very worst of all, for 2 reasons. First, because its love continues to show it what God deserves at its hands, and secondly, because it acknowledges to itself that even the great things it does for God are imperfect and faulty. Hence confusion of face and affliction when it compares the meanness of its own conduct with the majesty of God. On this 3rd step the soul is very far from giving way to vainglory or presumption, or from condemning others. These anxious and other effects of the same kind are wrought in the soul when on the 3rd step of the ladder, and so the soul acquires strength and courage to ascend to the 4th. When the soul is on the 4th step of the ladder of love, it falls into a state of suffering, but without weariness, on account of the beloved. For, as St. Augustine saith, love makes all that is grievous and heavy to be light as nothing. It was on this step that the bride stood when she expressed her longing for the last, saying, "Put me as a seal upon thy heart, as a seal upon thy arm, for love," that is, the acts and operations of love, "is strong as death, jealousy is hard as hell." The spirit is now so strong, and has so subdued the flesh, that it is as regardless of it as the tree is of one of its leaves. It seeks not for consolation or sweetness, either in God or elsewhere, neither does it pray for God's gifts through any motive of self-interest or its own satisfaction. All it cares for now is how it shall please God, and serve Him in some measure as He deserves to be served, and in some degree corresponding with the graces it has received, and this at any and every cost. The spiritual man now is saying in his heart and mind, "My God and my Lord, how many there are who seek their own comfort and joy in Thee, and who pray for gifts and graces, but those who strive to please Thee, who offer Thee that which costs them something, and who cast their own interests aside, are very few. It is not Thy will to show mercy that fails, O my God, but it is we who fail in using Thy mercies as we ought, so as to bind Thee to show us Thy mercy continually." This degree of love is exceedingly high, for now the soul, earnest in its love, follows after God in the spirit of suffering for His sake, and God therefore frequently, and as it were continually, permits it to rejoice, visiting it sweetly in spirit, for the boundless love of Christ, the Word, cannot look on the sufferings of the souls that love without hastening to their relief. He has promised to do so by the mouth of the prophet, saying, "I have remembered thee, pitying thy youth, when thou followest me in the desert," which in its spiritual sense is that abandonment which the soul is conscious of with regard to all created things, when it cannot rest upon them or be at ease among them. On this 4th step of the ladder, the soul is so inflamed with love, and so set on fire with the desire after God, that it ascends upwards to the 5th. On the 5th step of the ladder, the soul longs after God, and desires Him with impatience. Such is now the eagerness of the soul to embrace and be united to the Beloved, that every moment of delay, how slight soever, seems to it long, tedious, and oppressive, and it is ever thinking that it has found its love, but when it sees that its desires are disappointed, which is almost continually the case, it faints away through the intenseness of its longing, as it is written, "My soul longeth and fainteth for the courts of the Lord." And now the soul must either obtain its desires or die, like Rachel, who said to Jacob, "Give me children, otherwise I shall die." Now it is nourished by love, for as was its hunger, so is its abundance, and so it ascends to the 6th step, the steps of which I am about to describe. Section 35 of The Obscure Night of the Soul by St. John of the Cross. When the soul has ascended to the 6th step, it runs lightly to God, and hope too runs without fainting, for hope has made it strong, so that it flies lightly onwards. It is of this step that the prophet speaks, saying, "They that hope in the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall take wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint." And the psalmist also, "As the hart panteth after the fountains of waters, so my soul panteth after thee, O God." The hart, when thirsty, runs quickly to the water. The cause of this quickness which the soul experiences on this step of the ladder is, that charity is enlarged, and the soul is now almost wholly purified, as it is written, "Without iniquity have I run," and again, "I have run the way of thy commandments, when thou didst enlarge my heart." And thus the soul ascends immediately from the 6th to the 7th degree of love. On the 7th step, the soul becomes so bold in its intense and loving exaltation, that no prudence can withhold it, no counsel control it, no shame restrain it, for the favour which God hath shown it has made it vehemently bold. This explains to us the words of the Apostle, that charity believeth all things, hopeth all things, endureth all things. It was in this state that Moses was when he said unto God, "Either forgive them this trespass, or if thou do not, strike me out of the book that thou hast written." Men of this spirit obtain from God what they so lovingly pray for, and so the psalmist says, "Delight in the Lord, and he will give thee the requests of thy heart." Standing on this step, the bride said boldly, "Let him kiss me with the kiss of his mouth." But remember, it is not lawful to be thus bold, unless the soul feels that the interior favour of the king's sceptre is extended to it, lest it should fall down the steps already ascended, in all of which humility must ever be preserved. From this boldness and courage of the 7th step, which God grants, that it may be bold with him in the vehemence of its love, the soul ascends to the 8th, where it lays hold of the Beloved and is united to him. On the 8th step the soul embraces the Beloved and holds him fast. "I found him whom my soul loveth. I held him, and I will not let him go." Here the desires of the soul are satisfied, but not without interruption. Some souls are thus satisfied, but they quickly fall back. For if they did not, and if that state of satisfaction continued, they would have attained to a state of glory even in this life. For this reason the soul tarries but briefly on this step of the ladder. Daniel, being a man of desires, was bidden, on the part of God, to remain here. "Daniel, thou man of desires, stand upright." The next step is the 9th, the degree of the perfect. On the 9th step the soul is on fire sweetly. This is the degree of the perfect, who burn sweetly in God, for this sweet and delicious ardour is the work of the Holy Ghost in the union of the soul with God. St. Gregory says of the Apostles that they burned interiorly with love sweetly, when the Holy Ghost descended upon them. The blessings and the riches of God, which the soul now enjoys, cannot be described, and if we were to write whole books on the subject, there would still be more to say. For this reason, and because I intend to speak of it hereafter, I shall now say no more of this step, except that it is immediately followed by the 10th and the last, which does not belong to this life. On the 10th step of the ladder, the soul becomes wholly assimilated into God in the beatific vision which it then enjoys, for having ascended to the 9th, it goeth forth out of the body. Love works in such souls, they are few, and perfectly purified in this life, what purgatory works in others in the next. For, "Blessed are the clean in heart, for they shall see God." As I have said, this vision is the cause of the soul's perfect likeness unto God. "We know," saith St. John, "that when he shall appear, we shall be like to him, because we shall see him as he is." And thus, whatever the soul may be, it will be like unto God, and so is called, and is, by participation, God. This is the secret ladder of which the soul speaks, though in the higher steps no longer secret to it, for love reveals itself to it in the great effects it produces. But on the highest step, the beatific vision, the last of the ladder, where God leans, nothing remains secret from the soul, by reason of its perfect likeness. And therefore our Saviour saith, In that day ye shall not ask me anything. Until that day come, notwithstanding the heights to which the soul ascends, something still remains secret from it, and that in proportion to the distance from its perfect likeness to the divine essence. In this way, then, by means of mystical theology and secret love, the soul goeth forth from all things and from itself, ascending upwards unto God. For love is like fire, which ever ascends, hastening to be absorbed in the centre of its sphere. Section 36 of the Obscure Night of the Soul by St. John of the Cross. The meaning of disguised. The colours in which the soul disguises itself. Having now explained why contemplation is a secret ladder, I have further to explain what is meant by the word disguised, for the soul says that it went forth by the secret ladder, disguised. For the clear understanding of this, it is necessary to keep in mind that to be disguised is nothing else but to hide oneself under another form than our own, either for the purpose of showing, under that concealment, the will and purpose of the heart with a view to gain the good will and affection of the person beloved, or for the purpose of hiding oneself from the observation of rivals, and thereby the better effect our object. Such a person assumes the disguise which shall most represent the affection of his heart, and which shall the best conceal him from his rivals. The soul, then, touched with the love of Christ, that it may gain his favour and good will, sallies forth in that disguise which shall most vividly represent the affections of the mind and secure it against the assaults of its enemies, the devil, the world, and the flesh. The disguise it assumes is a garment of three principal colours: white, green, and purple, emblems of the three theological virtues, faith, hope, and charity, which not only enable the soul to enter into the good graces of the Beloved, but also protect it against its enemies. Faith is a garment of such surpassing whiteness as to dazzle every intellectual vision. For when the soul has put on faith, it becomes invisible and inaccessible to the devil, because it is then most securely defended against him, its strongest faith. For he said, Whom resist, steadfast in faith. And with a view of entering into favour and union with the Beloved, the soul cannot put on a better garment, as the ground of the other virtues, than the white garment of faith, without which it is impossible to please God. But with a living faith, the soul is pleasing and acceptable unto God, who says so himself by the mouth of the prophet, I will espouse thee to me in faith. It is as if he said to the soul, If thou wilt be united and betrothed to me, thou must draw near, clad interiorly in faith. The soul assumes the white robe of faith when it goeth forth in the obscure night, walking in darkness and interior trials, receiving no light of consolation from the intellect, not from above, because the heavens seem shut and God hidden, not from below, because its spiritual directors can give it no satisfaction. And when it endures patiently and perseveres, amidst its trials, without fainting or falling away from the Beloved, who by these trials and temptations is proving its faith, so that it may be able hereafter to say with the psalmist, For the sake of the words of thy lips, I have kept hard ways. Over the white robe of faith the soul puts on the second colour, green, the emblem of the virtue of hope, which delivers it and protects from the assaults of its second enemy, the world. The freshness of a living hope in God inspires the soul with such energy and resolution, with such aspirations after the things of eternal life, that all this world seems to it, as indeed it is, in comparison with what it hopes for, dry, withered, dead, and worthless. Here the soul denudes itself of the garments and trappings of the world, by setting the heart upon nothing that is in it, and hoping for nothing that is or may be in it, living only in the hope of everlasting life. And therefore, when the heart is thus lifted up above the world cannot touch it or lay hold of it, nor even see it, and the soul, disguised in the vesture of hope, is secure from its second foe, the world. This is the reason why St. Paul calls the hope of salvation a helmet. Now a helmet is armour which protects and covers the whole head, and has no opening except in one place, where eyes may look through. Hope is such a helmet, for it covers all the senses of the head of the soul in such a way that they cannot be lost in worldly things, and leaves no part of them exposed to the arrows of the world. It has one loophole only through which the eyes may look upwards. This is the work of hope, to direct the eyes of the soul to God, as it is written, "My eyes are ever toward the Lord, looking for succour nowhere else." As the same psalmist writes, "As the eyes of the handmaid are on the hands of her mistress, so are our eyes unto the Lord our God, until he have mercy upon us," hoping in him. The green vesture of hope, for the soul is then ever looking upwards unto God, disregarding all besides, and delighting only in him, is so pleasing to the beloved that the soul obtains from him all it hopes for. This is why he tells the soul in the canticle, "Thou hast wounded my heart with one of thy eyes." It would not have been expedient for the soul, if it had not put on the green robe of hope, to claim such love, for it would not have succeeded, because that which influences the beloved and prevails is persevering hope. It is in the vesture of hope that the soul disguised goes forth securely in the secret and obscure night. Seeing that it goes forth so detached from all possessions, without any consolations, that it regards nothing, that its sole anxiety is about God, putting its mouth in the dust, if so be there may be hope. Over the white and green robes, as the crown and perfection thereof, the soul puts on the third, the splendid robe of purple. This is the emblem of charity, which not only enhances the beauty of the others, but which so elevates the soul and renders it so lovely and pleasing in his eyes that it ventures to say to him, "I am black but beautiful, O daughters of Jerusalem. Therefore hath the King loved me, and brought me into his secret chamber." This robe of charity is love, not only defends the soul from its third enemy, the flesh, for where the true love of God is, there is no room for self-love or for selfishness, but strengthens the other virtues also, and makes them flourish, beautifying the soul and adorning it with grace, so that it shall please the beloved, for without charity no virtue is pleasing unto God. This is the purple, spoken of in the canticle, by which the soul ascends to the seat where God reposes. The seat of gold, the going up of purple. It is in this robe of purple that the soul goeth forth in the obscure night out of itself, and from all created things, with anxious love inflamed by the secret ladder of contemplation to the perfect union of the love of God, its beloved Saviour. This, then, is the disguise which the soul assumes in the night of faith on the secret ladder. And these are the colours of it, namely, a certain most fitting disposition for its union with God in the three powers, memory, intellect, and will. Faith blinds the intellect, and empties it of all natural intelligence, and thereby disposes it for the union of the divine wisdom. Hope empties the memory, and withdraws it from all created things which can possess it, for as the Apostle writes, "Hope that is seen is not hope." Thus the memory is withdrawn from all things on which it might dwell in this life, and is fixed on what the soul hopes to possess. Hope in God, therefore, purely disposes the memory according to the measure of the emptiness it has wrought for union with Him. Charity, in the same way, empties the affections and desires of the will of everything that is not God, and fixes them on Him alone. This virtue of charity, then, disposes the will and unites it with God in love. And because these virtues, it being their special work, withdraw the soul from all that is not God, so also do they serve to unite the soul to Him. It is, therefore, impossible for the soul to attain to the perfection of the love of God unless it journeys in earnest in the robes of these three virtues. This disguise, therefore, which the soul assumed when it went forth in order to obtain what it aimed at, the loving union with the Beloved, was most necessary and expedient. And it was also a great happiness to have succeeded in thus disguising himself and persevering until it obtained the desired end, the union of love. Section 37 of the Obscure Night of the Soul by St. John of the Cross. O happy lot! It is very evident that it was a blessed thing for the soul to have succeeded in such an enterprise as this, by which it was delivered out of the hands of Satan, from the world, and from its own sensuality, in which, having gained that liberty of spirit so precious and desirable, it rose from meanness to dignity, from being earthly and human, became heavenly and divine, having its conversation in heaven, like those who are in the state of perfection, as I shall proceed to explain. I shall, however, be brief, because the most important point, that which chiefly determined me to explain the obscure night to many souls who enter on it without knowing it, has been already in some degree explained, and I have also described, though in inadequate terms, what great blessings descend upon the soul in that night, and what a great happiness it is to be passing through it. This I did, that when such souls are alarmed at the trials that have come upon them, they may be encouraged by the certain hope of the numerous and great blessings which they will receive in this night. Beside this, it was a blessed lot for the soul on account of what it describes in the following line. Section 38 of the Obscure Night of the Soul by St. John of the Cross. The wonderful hiding place of the soul, which the devil, though he penetrates into other higher places, cannot enter. In darkness and concealment. In concealment, that is, secretly and hidden. So when the soul says that it went forth in darkness and concealment, it explains the more clearly the great security it found in obscure contemplation on the road of the union of the love of God. The words darkness and concealment mean here that the soul, having gone forth into the obscurity, travelled therefore in secret, unknown to the evil one, beyond the reach of his wiles and stratagems. The reason why the soul is free, concealed from the devil and his wiles in the obscurity of contemplation, is that infused contemplation, to which it is now admitted, is passively infused into it, in secret, without the cognizance of the senses and of the interior and exterior powers of the sensitive part. And that, too, is the reason why it escapes from not only the embarrassments which the faculties naturally and through their weakness present before it, but also from the evil one who, were it not for the sensitive faculties, could never know what is passing in the soul. The more spiritual, therefore, the communication is, and the further it is removed beyond the reach of sense, the less able is the devil to perceive it. This being the case, it becomes a matter of great moment, greatly conducive to the soul's security, that the senses of our lower nature should have no knowledge whatever of the interior conversation of the soul with God, and that for two reasons. First, that the spiritual communication may be the more abundant, which it will be when the weakness of our lower nature does not impede liberty of spirit. The second is, that the soul is more secure because the evil one cannot know what is passing within it. The words of our Lord, "Let not thy left hand know what thy right hand doth," may be, in a spiritual sense, understood of this, and we may understand him to say, "Let not thy left hand," that is, man's inferior nature, "know what is passing in the higher and spiritual part of the soul." That is, let the divine communications remain unknown to the lower senses, and a secret between thy spirit and God. It is true, when these interior and most hidden communications occur, that the devil, though he knows neither their nature nor their form, ascertains their existence, and that the soul is then receiving some great blessings merely from observing the silence and repose of the senses, and the powers of our sensitive nature. And then, when he sees that he cannot thwart them in the inmost depth of the soul, he does all he can to disquiet and disturb the sensitive part, which is accessible to him, by fears and horrible dread, intending thereby to trouble the higher and spiritual part of the soul, and to frustrate the blessings it then receives and enjoys. But very often, when this contemplation pours its light purely into the mind and offers it violence, the devil, with all his efforts, is not able to disquiet it, for then the soul becomes the recipient of renewed benefits, love, and a more secure peace. In its consciousness of the disturbing presence of the foe, it runs inwardly into itself, without knowing how it comes to pass, and feels assured of a certain refuge where it can hide itself beyond the reach of the evil one. And thus its peace and joy are multiplied, of which the devil attempted to rob it. All those terrors assail it only from without. It sees clearly and exults that it can in the meanwhile enjoy in secret the calm peace and sweetness of the bridegroom, which the world and the devil can neither give nor take away. The soul is now experiencing the truth of what the bride says in the canticle: "Behold, 80 valiant ones surround the bed of Solomon, because of fears in the night." Strength and peace abound within the soul, though the flesh and the bones are frequently tormented without. At other times, when the spiritual communications flow over into the senses, the devil succeeds the more easily in disquieting the mind, and in disturbing it with the terrors with which he assails it through the senses. At that time the mental agonies are immense, and occasionally surpassing all description, for when spirit has to do with spirit, the evil one causes an intolerable horror in the good one, that is, in the soul, when it succeeds in disturbing it. This is the meaning of the bride in her account of what happened to her when she tried to be interiorly recollected, so as to have the fruition of these goods. "I went down," she says, "into the garden of nuts to see the fruits of the valleys, and to look if the vineyard had flourished. I knew not. My soul troubled me for the chariots, and the confused cries of Aminadab," that is, the devil. This contradiction of the devil takes place also when God bestows his favours upon a soul by the instrumentality of a good angel. The devil sees this occasionally, because God in general permits it to become known to the enemy, and he may do what he can, according to the measure of justice, against that soul, and that he may be debarred from pleading that he had no opportunity of seizing on that soul as he did in the case of Job. It is therefore expedient that God should place these two combatants, the good angel and the devil, on an equality when they contend for a human soul, in order that the victory may be of greater worth, and that the soul, triumphant and faithful in temptation, may be the more abundantly rewarded. This is the reason why God, in the order of grace, permits Satan to disquiet and tempt the soul which he is guiding therein. When such a soul has real visions through the instrumentality of an angel, God suffers the evil spirit to represent false visions of the same kind, in such a way that an incautious soul may be very easily deluded, as it has happened to many. We have an instance of this in Exodus, where we read that the magicians of Pharaoh wrought signs and wonders resembling those wrought by Moses. For when Moses turned water into blood, The magicians of Egypt did the same, and when he brought forth frogs, so did the magicians. It is not in bodily visions only that the evil spirit apes God, but in spiritual communications also, which are effected through the instrumentality of an angel, whenever he succeeds in discovering them. For as it is written, he beholdeth every high thing, that is, he apes them, and insinuates himself among them as well as he can. Spiritual visions have neither form nor figure, such is the characteristic of spirit, and therefore Satan cannot imitate them, nor occasion others which shall in any way represent them. And so, when the good angel communicates spiritual contemplation, the evil spirit, in order to disturb it while the soul is being thus visited, presents himself before it with a certain horror and spiritual confusion, which is occasionally exceedingly painful. Sometimes the soul quickly disembarrasses itself, so that the terror of the evil spirit may have no time to make any impression upon it, and recollects itself, favoured herein by that spiritual grace which the good angel then communicates. Sometimes, too, God permits this horror and trouble to last a long time, and this is a greater torment to the soul than all the evils of this life can be, the remembrance of which afterwards is sufficient to produce great pain. All this passes in the soul without its doing or undoing anything of itself in regard to these representations or impressions. But we must remember that, when God suffers the evil spirit thus to afflict the soul, it is with a view to purify and prepare it by that spiritual vigil for some great festival and spiritual grace which it is His will to bestow upon it, who never mortifies but to give life, who never humbles but to exalt. This speedily ensues, for the soul, according to the measure of the dark purgation past, enters upon the fruition of sweet spiritual contemplation, and that is so sublime at times that no language can describe it. This is to be understood of those divine visitations which are the work of an angel, and wherein the soul is not wholly secure, nor hidden in so great obscurity, but that the devil succeeds in discovering its state. But when God visits the soul himself, the words of the stanza are then true, for in perfect obscurity, hidden from the enemy, it receives at such time the spiritual graces of God. The reason of the difference is that God, being the sovereign Lord, dwells substantially in the soul, and that neither angel nor devil can discover what is going on there, nor penetrate the profound and secret communications which take place between him and the soul. These communications, because the work of our Lord himself, are wholly divine and supreme, certain substantial touches of the divine union between himself and the soul. In one of these, because the highest possible degree of prayer, the soul receives greater good than in all the rest. These are those touches for which the bride prayed, saying, "Let him kiss me with the kiss of his mouth." This being a thing that so intimately relates to God, the soul, anxious to approach him, values and desires one touch of the divinity more than all the other graces which he bestows upon it. Hence the bride in the canticle, after many graces there described, is not satisfied, but prays for those divine touches. "Who shall give thee to me for my brother, sucking the breast of my mother, that I may find thee without, and kiss thee with the mouth of my soul, and now no man may despise me, or presume against me." She means that communication which God makes alone, without, and secret from all creatures, and so she says, "that I may find thee without, and sucking at the breast of my mother." This occurs when the soul in liberty of spirit enjoys these blessings in sweetness and interior peace, and when the sensitive part thereof cannot hinder it, nor the devil by means of that sensitive part interfere with it. Then, indeed, the evil spirit will not venture to assail the soul, because he will not be able to approach it, neither can he know of those divine touches in the substance of the soul wrought in loving knowledge of the substance of God. No man may arrive at this blessed condition but by interior purgation and detachment, by being spiritually hidden from all created things. It is a work wrought in obscurity, in the hiding place, wherein the soul is confirmed more and more in union with God by love, and therefore the soul sings in darkness and concealment. When these favors are shown to the soul in secret, that is, in the spirit only, the higher and lower portions of the soul seem to it knows not how, to be so far apart that it recognizes two divisions in itself, each so distinct from the other that neither seems to have anything in common with the other, being in appearance so separated and distinct. And, in reality, this is in a certain manner true, for in its present condition, which is wholly spiritual, it has no commerce with the sensitive part. Thus the soul becomes wholly spiritual, and the spiritual passions and desires are in a great degree extinguished in this hiding place of intuitive contemplation. The soul, then, speaking of its higher part, sings the last line of this stanza, "My house being now at rest." Section 39 of the Obscure Night of the Soul by St. John of the Cross. My house being now at rest. This is as much as saying, my higher nature and my lower nature also, each in its desires and powers, being now at rest, I went forth to the divine union of the love of God. As the soul is doubly assailed and purified in the warfare of the obscure night, that is, in all the senses, passions, and powers of the sensitive and spiritual parts of it, so also in these senses, passions, and powers of the sensitive and spiritual parts does it attain doubly to peace and rest. The words, my house being now at rest, are repeated at the end of the second stanza, on account of the division of the soul into spiritual and sensitive, which parts, if they are ever to go forth into the divine union of love, must first of all be changed, corrected, and tranquilized with regard to all the things of sense and spirit, after the likeness of the state of innocence in Adam, notwithstanding that the soul be not wholly delivered from the temptations of our lower nature. These words, therefore, which in the first stanza relate to the tranquillity of our lower and sensitive nature, now in the second stanza refer particularly to the higher and spiritual part of the soul, and this is the reason of the repetition. The soul obtains the tranquillity and rest of the spiritual house habitually and perfectly, so far as it is possible in this life, through the substantial touches of the divine union, which, in secret, hidden from the turmoil of Satan, sense, and passion, it receives from the divinity, whereby the soul is tranquilized, purified, strengthened, and confirmed, so as to become an effectual partaker of that union, which is the divine espousal of the soul to the Son of God. The instant the two houses of the soul are tranquil and confirmed, with the whole household of powers and desires sunk in sleep and silence, as to all things of heaven and earth, the divine wisdom, in the bond of loving possession, unites itself to the soul, and that is fulfilled which is written, while all things were in quiet silence, and the night was in the midst of her course, thy almighty word leapt down from heaven, from thy royal throne. The same truth is set before us in the canticle, where the bride, after passing away from those who took her veil away and wounded her, saith, when I had a little passed by them, I found him whom my soul loveth. This union is unattainable without great purity. And purity is attainable only by detachment from all created things and sharp mortifications. This is signified by the robbery of the veil and the wounding of the bride in the night when she went forth searching after her beloved. For the new veil of the betrothal cannot be put on till the old veil be taken away. He, therefore, who will not go out in this obscure night to seek the beloved, who will not deny and mortify his own will, but seek him at his ease on his bed, as the bride once did, will never find him. The soul says here that it found him, but only when it went forth into the obscurity, anxious with love. Section 40 of the Obscure Night of the Soul, by St. John of the Cross. In that happy night, in secret, seen of none, and seeing not myself, without other light or guide, save that in which my heart was burning. The soul still continues the metaphor of natural night in celebrating and magnifying the blessings of the night of the Spirit, by means of which it has been able quickly and securely to compass the desired end. 3 of these blessings are set forth in this stanza. 1. In this blessed night of contemplation, God guides the soul by a road so solitary and so secret, so remote and alien from sense, that nothing belonging thereto, nor any created thing, can approach to disturb it or detain it on the road to the union of love. 2. The second blessing of the spiritual obscurity of this night is, that all faculties of the higher nature of the soul are in darkness. Consequently, the soul, seeing nothing and unable to see, is not detained by anything which is not God from drawing near unto him, and therefore advances freely, unencumbered by the obstacles of forms and figures and natural apprehensions. For these are the things which usually embarrass the soul, and prevent it from being always in union with God. 3. The third blessing is, that while the soul is supported by no particular interior light of the intellect, nor by any exterior guide comforting it on this high road, the obscure darkness has deprived it of all of this. Love and faith, now burning within it, drawing the heart toward the Beloved, influence and guide it, and make it fly upwards to God along the road of solitude, while it knows neither how nor by what means that is done.